To our breaking news now, the DA's motion of no confidence against the cabinet has failed. The DA, EFF, UDM and FF Plus voted in favour of the motion, but majority of ANC MPs, of course, all voting against it. Our reporter Lindsay Dentlinger following the story for us. She joins us now live. Lindsay, naturally expected.
It was indeed, although quite unusual bedfellows this evening, the DA and the EFF, to support that motion, especially since we saw that little fracas over somebody sitting in the wrong chair earlier today between the DA and the EFF. But they supported the DA's motion, but of course the numbers were never going to be in their favour, Shahan. As you pointed out there, support from the Freedom Front Plus, only 2 seats from the UDM and from the ATM, but of course losing out to get the support of another bigger opposition party, that being the IFP, and of course other smaller parties, including Patricia de Lille's Good Party. None of those prepared to support the DA in its motion.
Yeah, and just looking at the numbers, it was 231 votes against the motion, 131 for and 1 abstention. So this, of course, would be a move that the Democratic Alliance will be questioned about, because we all knew the numbers would never work in its favour. But it is something that actually got South Africans talking today, which many would argue is exactly what the Democratic Alliance wanted.
That is, in fact, exactly the case, Shahan. And before today's sitting, they had a demonstration outside the gates of Parliament for that very reason. They want to highlight to South Africans, they want to bring to their attention the way these ministers are performing. Just last week, they did their own audit of these performance agreements that ministers had entered into, and doing an analysis and looking at the targets and trying to pinpoint where these ministers are falling short, and wanting to show to South Africans that if you are unhappy with your circumstances and the conditions you find yourself in, it is because, in their view, that this cabinet is just not doing enough to better the lives of South Africans. And so that, as you say, is really the point, and what Sally and I just spoke about a little earlier, that it's all this theatrical game of politics going into the ANC's elective conference. There were snipes made in the House this afternoon about paying your taxes and whatnot. So it's all really a show of politics as the ANC goes into the elective conference, and, as you're saying, highlighting to South Africans and trying to set the cat amongst the pigeons, really, and to pinpoint and to show up President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet.
And let's talk about some of the points that the Democratic Alliance and other opposition parties made about this cabinet and why they believe they're ineffective in actually doing their jobs.
Well, amongst the many things that were highlighted across opposition parties today, of course, crime, gender-based violence, those are always issues that are top of the agenda, and Police Minister Becky Cele often taking a lot of flack for this. Several of those who debated the motion this afternoon highlighting that. Then, of course, Fikile Mbalula also taking a lot of flack for the failing rail infrastructure, and for the taxi violence, for not being able to resolve the e-toll situation. So he was taking a lot of flack there. And then, of course, the Minister of Small Business Development also taking flack, saying if she was doing more, the economy and smaller entrepreneurs would be doing better than they currently are. The EFF also took issue with the Public Enterprises Minister, again pointing at Eskom. We know that is a real bugbear for the EFF and for many other political parties. So those are among all the issues. Those are bread and butter issues that impact South Africans: the electricity, their inability to get to work in a safe manner, their lives being under threat because of the high crime rates in the country. These are things that are being highlighted, and of course just not enough jobs being created and not enough business being stimulated to help smaller entrepreneurs create the jobs that are so sorely needed.
And obviously, in the interest of balance, the ANC is rubbishing all of that, and they were talking about the strides they've made since the end of apartheid.
They are, and they are accusing the DA of cheap politicking and claiming that in cities and in municipalities where they govern, that they still rule in a way and decide on services along apartheid lines. That, for example, here in the city of Cape Town, many of the townships still in a terrible state, and many of the people who live in them are without the kinds of services that you would see elsewhere in the city. And so they insist that the DA just wants to co-govern in certain municipalities so that it can use older style tactics of providing services. And of course the ANC blaming the country's past, really, and saying that that we are being too critical in acknowledging how far the country has come since the dawn of democracy, and coming out in support of those ministers who were allowed to vote for themselves this afternoon, which was something the DA also didn't want to happen, but they scored this tiny victory in us being able to openly see how everybody voted, even though it took an inordinate length of time, but they were sorely to be disappointed that the ANC were not going to vote against themselves today, even one or two of them.
And very quickly, many people were watching out for the ATM's motion of no confidence in the president. That, of course, didn't happen. Tell us why.
So that's really a legal battle, and a good chunk of time was spent this afternoon debating where exactly that motion now lies in terms of the ATM's challenge before the court. You will recall that on Monday, the Western Cape High Court struck it from the urgent role because it didn't deem that the matter should have been heard on an urgent basis, and thought that the ATM should have brought that matter to court earlier. The ATM's contention this afternoon, they were not going to move the motion. They wanted postponed. They believe that this matter is still before the court because the merits of their case in terms of whether or not a secret ballot should be held has not yet been heard. And so there were that debate really going on this afternoon. The Speaker, of course, wants it taken off the order paper. She doesn't want it to block any other party from potentially bringing the same motion. And so for lack of agreement today, and for the ATM's refusal to move the motion, which meant that it couldn't be debated if the one who's tabling it refuses to move the motion in the House, it will now be returned to Parliament's Programming Committee, which sits tomorrow morning, again to debate how exactly to proceed, and whose legal advice, that of Parliament or that of the ATM, who now is correct in terms of the status of this legal challenge before the courts. And so we wait to see perhaps tomorrow as to exactly what's going to happen, whether it just goes into abeyance, which we've seen happen over the past 2 years, or whether it gets removed, which the ATM is unlikely to want to do.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Our reporter Lindsay Dentlinger is in Cape Town. That, of course, our breaking news story, Sally.